Hey everyone, it's Colin. How's it going? It's a toy that many of us played with as kids, yet strangely enough has maintained popularity with adults. This time, let's talk about Legos. Alright, so this is going to be a little bit different of an episode in a few ways. Legos are something that I've long been interested in, as I'd imagine that many of you out there have been interested in them as well. But I recently picked up this kit, this Lego Creator Kit of the Space Shuttle. It's number 31066. It reminds me of a kit that I had when I was a kid. And my bin of Legos from when I was a kid is long gone. Probably sold at a garage sale decades ago. My parents, long got rid of them. But this reminded me of a kit that I had back then. There have been several Space Shuttle kits over the years, apparently. But seeing this on the shelf really evoked a memory, and the price tag of like $25 or whatever this was, it wasn't a ton of money, kind of got me thinking, I'm going to put this together. What the hell? Let's just do it. Now, I could have gone and done some sort of big analytical kind of psychological research into, Legos and why they stimulate the mind and all that kind of stuff. But I figured, let's do something a little bit different, like with this episode. And instead, I'm just going to put this kit together and we'll just kind of talk as I do it. Apparently, Lego YouTube channels are a thing. I've never really gotten into them. But there are creators out there where they will just, build Lego kits and review them and stuff. And that's the primary focus of their YouTube channel, which I find rather interesting and kind of fascinating. I mean, you think about it and there's tons and tons of stuff. Let me start opening this while I'm talking. Hey, how about that be a good idea? You'd think that that'd be kind of a weird topic, to have a YouTube channel about Legos and all that. But, there's such this breadth of topics on YouTube that people can focus in on. I guess it's not really surprising. So it's been forever since I've actually put together a real Lego kit like this. There are some other bits that I've been interested in lately, and it's kind of a Lego, I don't want to call it a knockoff because it's slightly different. They're called Nanoblock. I'm sure some of you have heard of those, familiar with them. They're basically mini tiny Legos, and they're not so much like let's build stuff that can do things, cityscapes and, mechanical objects, that kind of stuff like the Technic series, but rather they're more about architecture and all that. Nanoblock is owned by a Japanese company, and they specialize in like these kind of mini Lego reproductions of famous buildings, that kind of stuff. I've been kind of into that because a lot of them are centered around famous Japanese buildings, which I'm interested in, but they've done a lot of worldwide kind of stuff, and now they're starting to expand into other objects. But they can be very intricate just because of the tiny nature of the Legos. I mean, well, they're not really Legos. And I should be careful here because I understand that the Lego company is very, let's just say, protective of its brand. I've heard of people getting in trouble by using Lego in a generic term, so I got to be careful. This is proper, like, legit Lego. And I should note, I paid for this out of pocket. Bought it at Target for, like I said, like $25-30 or something like that. Right off the bat, one thing that's kind of cool about this kit, and it kind of speaks to the nature of Legos in general, is it's designed to be the Space Shuttle kit, but it has the parts to build other stuff. And they actually give you the book as to how to put together. It's like one of these is kind of like a lunar habitat type of thing. Another one is this like rover type of vehicle. I'm more interested in the Space Shuttle right now, so we'll just go through it. But have you put the minifigs together first? That's interesting. But Legos, it's just one of those things where you instantly kind of understand and recognize what they are and how they work. And I'm sure in a way that's really kind of what gets kids involved in it. I mean, it cuts across all cultures and upbringings and all that. They can be really expensive if you get the big kits, but they can be fairly inexpensive if you get the little kits. And especially if you buy like secondhand sets, which may or may not be complete, but you know, they can be downright cheap. Now, one thing that I do find really fascinating and interesting is, oh boy, yeah, this is totally bringing me back to when you just dump the Legos out all over the place and can't find any of them. One thing that I find really interesting is how things have kind of taken on. Ooh boy, which face do I want? Do I want the I'm freaking out face, or do I want the I'm grim face? Well, you're flying in a big rocket through space. How about the freaking out face? When I was a kid, growing up in the 80s, Legos weren't notably a collector item type of thing, right? They came and went in terms of the models and everything available, but none of them were really like, oh man, that's going to be worth $1 billion someday. At least not that I felt. It really just kind of came down to feeling like, you know, Legos are Legos, and you buy them, and you enjoy them. And you buy more, and you dump them all in a bucket, and get them all mixed up, because that's what you did. And when you went to play with them, you'd dump them all out on the floor, because again, that's just what you did. You know, and you'd end up losing some parts, and maybe ending up with other parts that you didn't otherwise need. And it was all good, right? You didn't really worry too much about it. Yeah, you were missing some parts. Okay, that sucks. But life went on. Now it seems like Lego has dramatically changed, where people are just taking them super, super seriously. And there are adults that are getting into collecting Legos. And I mean, I know people who have like basements full of Lego sets, some of them complete, some of them not complete, some of them maybe are vintage kits, some of them are newer ones. They'll go out, like when there's a brand new set that really interests them, they'll go out and pick it up right away. Other times it's this, you know, this hunt like on places like eBay and other various locations on the internet to go and you know, seek out these kits that seem really interesting to them. And, you know, I guess that kind of makes sense in a way, because there's going to be people who collect like everything, right? There are always going to be collectors for anything that is able to be collected, really. I am making a huge mess with all these Legos on my desk now. And this may end up being a terrible idea to try and do this in podcast format. I'm apologizing right now. I should have apologized even earlier on to anyone who listens to the audio-only version of this, because you're going to have absolutely no freaking clue what's going on. All you're going to hear is all this noise of the Legos rattling against my desk. But, so, I mean, amongst some people, it makes sense that they would go and collect Legos, because it's a thing that can be collected. And a lot like with, say, retro video games, you know, it's going to evoke a sense of nostalgia. I would be willing to bet that the majority of people who are into collecting Legos now are doing so because they played with them as a kid. And, you know, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Just like I don't think there's anything wrong with, you know, collecting vintage video games or anything like that. Where it starts to get kind of iffy is when it becomes consuming. You know, when you end up with an entire basement full of them. You know, so like with any kind of collection, you kind of want to maybe temper it a little bit. And it seems like there are people who will go out and spend ridiculous amounts of money on these kits, especially the vintage ones. Oh, those are the two round green ones. Be prepared to hear a lot of muttering to myself as I try to figure this out. Thankfully, believe it or not, as an aside, and there will be probably a lot of those during this episode, this kit, compared to those nanoblocks that I was talking about, this kit seems like it's going to be infinitely easier, mostly because these parts are actually a lot bigger. Those nanoblock ones, sometimes you got to get tweezers out in order to put them together. They're that intricate, and sometimes it kind of depends on balance. A lot of the pieces are very similar to each other, and that can be a bit confusing at times. Let's just say I have a big setup of Tokyo Tower. That thing was like 1,000 pieces, which, you know, to the seasoned like Lego people, probably no big deal, right? That thing took me probably 4 hours to put together just because of how intricate it is and how careful you have to be with all the pieces. So anyway, so like, you know, with collecting, I think that's what we were talking about. Yeah, it comes down to just setting boundaries for yourself, I think. And that, you know, holds true for largely, you know, for anything that people would want to collect, right? So in that way, I don't think it's all that bizarre, I guess, for adults to be getting into Lego. But one also can wonder, I mean, the world in some ways has dramatically changed from even, say, I don't know, 15 years ago. It's arguably a much scarier place. Or I should say the world wants us to think it's a scarier place. I'm not necessarily convinced it actually is. And speaking about like always being online and connected and all that, and the continuous deluge of information that we face, well, that's probably a podcast for another time, but things are quite a bit different. And you know, maybe it's a comfort factor in a way, you know, where faced with the realities of the world, or being an adult, or being told they need to be an adult but don't necessarily want to, which I suppose is another topic in and of itself. You know, some people are just going to go towards their comfort zone. And for some people, their comfort zone is stuff from their childhood. And they don't really want to let that go. And I guess it raises a very important question is, should you have to let go of these so-called childish things as you grow up? I'm not quite sure you need to. You know what I mean? Like, being an adult, in quotation marks, is what we want it to be. And I'll be the first to admit that I think perhaps some people do need to maybe step up a little more in terms of actually doing that like adult kind of thing. Being responsible, I guess, is really the better way to describe it. And what else? So here's the all right, so I'm going to totally change topic real quick. Here's the classic problem with Legos, is that you always dump them out like this. And then it's part of just the process of playing with Legos to dig through this big thing of parts. And that's actually the most time-consuming thing, is it's not necessarily the, you know, reading the instructions and finding the pieces and putting them, you know, like putting them together part. It's the just like getting everything organized so that you can put them together, finding the pieces that you need, especially when some of them are weird, like weird looking pieces. Like some of these I've never seen before. Granted, Legos have changed considerably, it seems like. Well, in some ways. since when I got sets as a kid. One thing that I'm a little frustrated with Lego about, although, again, it's just them adapting to the times, kind of coming back to this whole, millennials versus zennials versus even the generations that come after. They have been going more and more towards these like themed kind of sets. It feels like maybe that's not true, but it feels like they're moving more and more towards these theme kind of sets where they just give you all of these like custom parts that you then, put together. And it's not so much about getting a bunch of generic parts and using your creativity to come up with what you want to make. It feels like it's more like they just give you these parts now and it's up to you to just put it together is all. Like everything is all pretty much ready to rock. You just get these parts and you throw them in and then you're done. It's just the way it is. Things are going to change. I guess. So let me just say this. As I'm filming this, the news is coming out that Star Trek is going to have some new series and stuff. They're apparently going kind of full bore into coming up with some new Star Trek series. And apparently, they even got Patrick Stewart to sign on to play Captain Picard again. And I'm just sitting here going, no, please don't. Just stop. But I have to keep reminding myself something that I read around the time that the latest Star Wars movie came out. I think it was The Force Awakens. I think it was around the time Force Awakens came out. And everyone was complaining about that movie and how it's not Star Wars anymore, how it's totally different. And, they wish it hadn't been made, or they wish it had been made, in a different way or whatever. The thing that I read that really kind of hit home for me was the idea of, what? The new Star Wars movie isn't for old school Star Wars fans. It wasn't designed for that. It wasn't meant for those people. The Star Wars movie is meant for new fans. The whole idea is they want to get new people into the franchise because that's where more money is going to get made. You will make some money off the diehards, but you need to keep that franchise going. You need to keep getting new people interested in some of these things. And you've got to speak their language. There's, of course, going to be, some people who will naturally gravitate towards it, but that may not necessarily be enough. And so the whole point behind doing like Star Wars in a different way is that it's got to be fresh and different and not like the old series, because that's what you need to do to get the attention to it. Because otherwise it's just going to be a bunch of people perceiving it to be like, Star Wars, yeah, it's that old movie or whatever with the Skywalker guy, and I don't care. I'm going to go watch something else instead. Because rightly or wrongly, maybe sometimes this stuff gets the perception of, the whole, I don't want to do what my parents did kind of mentality, right? The childish rebellion stage, which I think sticks with people for a lot longer than they'd otherwise be willing to admit. That whole rebelliousness. I should start organizing some of these parts maybe, because then it would give me a better chance at finding what I'm looking for. And so you know, that makes a lot of sense. Is the idea is if you're interested in old Star Wars or old Star Trek, you already have that. You already had your time, I guess you could say. And in terms of new stuff, it's somebody else's time. You know, they deserve to, I guess, get their own new fresh stories and takes on the franchise and all that kind of stuff. And that, I think, is also holding true with even things like Legos, where, yeah, Legos are different now in some ways. They still feel familiar. I mean, I'm recognizing a lot of these pieces despite it being a very long time since I actually bought and assembled like a proper Lego set. But there is some new stuff here, some new parts that I haven't seen before. And so I think that goes towards also the explanation as to, you know, why things seem to be different now. Why these Lego sets are unlike the way they were before in some ways. And it's because, well, they got to advance. They got to move forward with interest. There's the one piece that I needed hiding for all that time. You know, they just got to move forward with trying to get new eyeballs on the product and getting interest in it and all that. And so I'm starting to be, I guess, at peace with the whole concept of, you know what, things are going to be different than they were before. And there's nothing that you can really do about it other than just accept it. I feel like there's still a whole ton of redeeming values to Legos, even though they've changed, even though they're way different than what I remember them being like. You can see it. I mean, I've got a nephew who is just a few years old. He loves Legos, absolutely loves them. And he's becoming really good at putting them together. And a lot of that just comes down to, one, how easy they are, but two, they really kind of get you working your mind in a different way. You know, they put you in kind of a different mindset. And I definitely consider them an educational thing as much as they are also entertainment. I mean, it's fun. It's absolutely fun to be putting this kind of stuff together. But even as an adult, there's something to be said for even subconsciously just kind of, you know, mentally going through figuring out what pieces go where. Even though you have instructions, it's interesting to be maybe kind of one step ahead mentally as you're trying to put all this together, to figure out, you know, as you look at some of these oddball parts, oh, I wonder where that's going to go. Or I wonder where this is going to go. And maybe start to kind of work that out. Or at some point be surprised. Oh, wow, I wasn't expecting this part to go here. That kind of thing. I guess to kind of come back around to the beginning of the topic, I mean, it makes sense in other ways as to why people would be so, you know, interested, I guess, in Legos still. Because it is a form of, you know, kind of mental exercise, mental stimulation, and it's pretty innocuous. See, like right now, I'm still figuring out like what pieces are going where, and it's becoming interesting to see how some of these are coming together. Don't lose any of them. That was always the toughest part as a kid, is when you lost pieces. Granted, I only ever remember putting like the kit together based on its instructions like once. You know, you'd get a new set and you'd put them together and it's like, oh, okay, cool, that's great. And then you'd play with it as is for a while, and you'd be like, oh, okay, that's nice. And then you'd take it apart, and then it would never get put back together the same way ever again. That's just what I remember. I do also find it really interesting, just kind of the level of detail they can get out of some of this stuff, and then how far your imagination can go to kind of fill in the gaps, right? Like, this is, from a detail perspective, not going to be terribly accurate to what the Space Shuttle orbiters actually look like. But I think most people still recognize the general shape and just kind of can fill in the gaps, I guess you could say. But at the same time, there's some little details in here that I have no idea why they did, because you can't really see them from the outside, yet they went and did it anyway. And again, I'm sorry for not actually being entertaining in this episode. Maybe some of you like this. I don't know. Maybe I should have recorded this in stereo and called it an ASMR video or something. But anyway, so I do find it kind of fascinating just how many kits Lego has managed to actually put together over the years. You know, it's kind of surprising that after so long, because I mean the company's been in business for decades, you would think that they would have in some ways kind of like run out of ideas, that they'd just be repeating themselves over and over again. But you know, there's always new stuff to make, and part of it's also that whole thing we were talking about it just needs to be, you know, fresh for the next generation, I guess you could say. Where, you know, so what if maybe they're, you know, building another race car? It's a different race car. It's different for the next set of kids who would otherwise go and put these kits together. And if the diehards want to go out and buy them anyway, then, you know, cool. They're going to do that. Otherwise, you know, no big deal. And what I do find kind of fascinating is, in some ways, Lego does seem to be catering to that kind of, you know, adult diehard market, where there are some absolutely incredible but very complicated kits that you can buy. I mean, we're talking hundreds of dollars. Doesn't this piece kind of look like it's R2-D2 sitting down in there? I didn't know that the Space Shuttle used droids. Anyway, it makes perfect sense. I mean, if you're going to be a company and you're going to realize, you know, you realize that there are people out there. Now it kind of looks like Bender. You know, so like I was saying, so some of these kits are just absolutely massive and super expensive. Just tons and tons of money, but I'll be honest, they look like a lot of fun. And yeah, there's some limited, you know, so-called replay value to them, where you put them together, and then after that, what are you going to do? Take them apart and put them back together again? I mean, you know, you build these sets, and I guess you just kind of show them off, is really maybe the big difference between the way adults play with Legos and the way kids play with Legos. Oh, hey, there we go. Oh, they close up. They didn't give you any name plaques with this, which I'm a little disappointed about, because this needs to be the Space Shuttle Endeavour, because of course I have a favorite space shuttle. And I'm guessing you're going to get some extra pieces as part of building the other sets, maybe. But I mean, clearly I'm enjoying myself, at least, you know, relatively speaking here, putting this together. So even if you're not necessarily die hard into putting Legos together, I just think it's still something that can be enjoyable for a lot of people. And maybe that's the magic behind this. You know, maybe that's really what people who are seriously into these kits really, you know, are getting into. Maybe it's really just about not necessarily just reliving one's youth, but rather, oh, and this is the tail. All right. That enjoyment of putting this all together. And that's it for the manual. I did end up with some spare parts, although I've got the wrench. So dude can have the wrench and then accidentally let it go in the middle of space. Oh shit. That actually happened. I'm trying to remember what flight that was, but they were up. It was a few years back. They were doing a spacewalk, and one of the astronauts had a bag full of tools, and they didn't like tether it to themselves or something like that, and they let go of it to do something else, and the bag floated away. That's got to be frustrating, right? Anyway, hopefully at the very least you enjoyed this episode or didn't hate it too horribly, whatever. Depending on the response that I get to this one, I may or may not do something like this again in the future. I had this kit for like a month, and I've been putting off on putting it together, just waiting for some time when I could spend to actually assemble it. And I figured, you know, the topic of Lego was an interesting one. Why not try and put the two together and just see what happens? Maybe it works, maybe it don't. I don't know. Let me know down in the comments. Also, let me know what you think about playing with Legos. Are you serious into this as a hobby, like as, you know, an adult, or not so much? Do you not care? Did you grow out of them? Or is it something that you've recently rediscovered? Maybe kind of like I have. I don't know. I'm just curious as to your thoughts, so be sure to hit me up down in the comments below. Also, if you're interested in audio-only versions of these podcasts, when they actually are more podcasts than watching me put Legos together, I've got audio-only versions of them available for Patreon supporters at all contribution levels. As little as $1 a month gets you access. They're plain MP3 downloads, plus there's private RSS feed support. Throw it in the podcast player of your choice. They usually go up a few days before they appear on YouTube, and it's just another way to help support the channel, so I'd appreciate it if that would be something you'd consider. Anyway, if you liked the video, I'd appreciate a thumbs up. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at ThisDoesNotComp. And as always, thanks for watching.